David had been living alone in his mountain cabin for 3 years. He worked as a park ranger in the Cedar Falls forest, and most days he loved the quiet life. The nearest town was 20 miles away, which was exactly how he liked it. No traffic, no crowds, no stress. Just him, the trees, and the mountains. That Tuesday night changed everything. Snow had been falling for hours. David sat by his fireplace, drinking hot coffee and reading a book about wildlife tracking. The wind outside was getting stronger, and he could hear branches creaking under the weight of the snow. Weather reports said the storm would last until morning, but David wasn't worried. He had plenty of firewood, food, and warm clothes. Around midnight, a bright flash lit up his windows. It wasn't lightning, to white, to steady. David set down his coffee and walked to the window. Through the falling snow, he could see a strange orange glow coming from somewhere deep in the forest. His ranger training kicked in. A glow like that usually meant fire, and fire in his forest was his responsibility. David put on his heavy winter coat, grabbed his flashlight and emergency kit, and headed out into the storm. The snow was already knee-deep. Each step was difficult, but David knew these woods better than his own living room. He followed the glow, which seemed to be getting dimmer as he got closer. After walking for 20 minutes, he found something that made him stop completely. There was a hole in the ground about 15 feet wide. The snow around it had melted away, and the earth was still warm. At the bottom of the hole sat something that definitely wasn't from around here. It looked like a large egg made of silver metal, about the size of a small car. Strange blue lights blinked slowly along its surface. David had seen plenty of weird things in the forest over the years. Bears doing unusual things, strange weather patterns, even some unexplained lights in the sky. But this was different. This was impossible. He climbed down carefully, using tree roots and rocks for support up close. The metal object was even stranger. It was perfectly smooth except for the blinking lights, and it felt warm to touch despite the freezing air. As David walked around it, looking for any kind of opening, one side of the object suddenly opened with a soft hissing sound. Warm air flowed out, carrying a sweet smell like flowers. David shined his flashlight inside and saw what looked like the interior of some kind of vehicle. There were no seats or steering wheel, just smooth surfaces covered with more of those blinking lights. And lying in the center was a person. It was a woman, and she was unconscious. David's first thought was that she must be freezing. She was wearing clothes, but they were thin and white, more like pajamas than winter gear. Her skin was so pale it almost seemed to glow in his flashlight beam, and her hair was long and silver-colored, unlike any natural hair color David had ever seen. He checked for a pulse. Her heart was beating, but her skin felt ice cold. David knew about hypothermia from his ranger training. If he didn't get her warm soon, she could die. Getting her out of the hole wasn't easy. The woman was unconscious and couldn't help, and David had to be careful not to hurt her. It took 15 minutes to get her to ground level, and by then his own hands were getting numb from the cold. David carried her back to his cabin, which took much longer than usual because of her weight and the deep snow. By the time he got home, his arms were aching and he was breathing hard. But he didn't stop. He laid her on his couch and immediately started a bigger fire in his fireplace. The woman's body temperature was dangerously low. David covered her with every blanket he had, but she was still shivering. He made hot tea and tried to get her to drink some, but she was too unconscious to swallow. David remembered from his first aid training that in severe hypothermia cases, body heat sharing was sometimes necessary. He hesitated. He didn't know this woman, but she was going to die if he didn't do something. David lay down next to her on the couch, sharing his body warmth. Almost immediately, he noticed something strange. Her skin began to warm up much faster than should have been possible. Within an hour, her shivering stopped completely. Round 4 in the morning, she woke up. Her eyes opened slowly, and David found himself looking into the most unusual eyes he'd ever seen. They were light blue, but they seemed to have tiny sparkles in them, like starlight. She looked at him calmly, not scared or confused like most people would be after waking up in a stranger's house. "Thank you," she said in perfect English, though her voice had a musical quality that sounded foreign. "You saved my life." David sat up, suddenly aware that he'd been lying next to a complete stranger. "You're welcome. I'm David. I found you in the forest. Are you hurt anywhere?" She slowly sat up, testing her arms and legs. "My name is Lyra. I don't think I'm injured, but I feel very cold again." As she spoke, David could see her skin getting paler. "This is difficult to explain, but I need to ask for your help with something unusual." "What kind of help?" Lyra looked directly at him. "I'm not from Earth, David. My ship crashed in your forest, and now I'm trapped here. My people have different bodies than yours. We need much more heat to survive, especially in cold places like this." David stared at her. "You're saying you're an alien?" "Yes, I know how that sounds, but it's true." Lyra held up her hand, and slowly, her skin began to glow with a soft white light. "My ship's heating system was damaged in the crash. Artificial heat sources like your fire help a little, but they're not enough. I need the warmth that comes from another living being." David was having trouble processing what he was seeing. The glowing skin looked completely real, not like any trick he could think of. "What exactly are you asking me? I need to stay close to you, especially at night when the temperature drops. Without that warmth, I'll become too cold to survive." Lyra's glow faded, and she looked genuinely worried. "I know this is a strange request from someone you just met." Outside, the wind was still howling, and snow continued to pile up against the windows. David looked at this strange, beautiful woman who claimed to be from another planet. Everything about the situation seemed impossible, but he'd seen that metal object in the forest. He'd felt how cold her skin was and how quickly it warmed up when he helped her. "How long would you need to stay?" David asked. "I'm not sure. My people will come looking for me, but it could take time. Maybe weeks or longer." David thought about his quiet, simple life. He thought about how lonely it had been lately, even though he'd chosen the isolation. He looked at Lyra, who was already starting to shiver again despite the warm fire. "Okay," he said finally. "You can stay, but we need to figure out how to make this work." Lyra smiled, and for a moment, her skin glowed softly again. "Thank you, David. You're very kind." As dawn approached, David made up his bed with extra blankets. Lyra lay down carefully, still wearing her strange white clothes. When David lay down beside her, he could feel how cold she'd become again. But as they lay there, sharing warmth, he felt her skin gradually become normal temperature. "Is this really happening?" David whispered in the dark. "Yes," Lyra whispered back. "And David, I promise I'll explain everything tomorrow. You deserve to know the whole truth." As David finally drifted off to sleep, he couldn't help wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Outside, the storm continued, but inside the cabin, two very different beings shared warmth and began what would become the most complicated relationship of David's life. The mysterious woman had fallen from the sky and into his world, and nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, David woke up feeling more rested than he had in months. Lyra was still sleeping beside him, her breathing slow and peaceful. Her skin looked normal now, with a healthy pink color instead of the deathly pale he'd seen the night before. David quietly got up and made coffee as the smell filled the cabin. Lyra stirred and opened her eyes. She sat up slowly, stretching like she'd had the best sleep of her life. "Good morning," she said with that same musical voice. "How did you sleep?" "Actually, really well. Better than usual." David handed her a cup of coffee. "How are you feeling?" "Much better. Thanks to you." Lyra took a sip and smiled. "This is delicious. We don't have anything like this on my world." Over breakfast, Lyra began to tell David about her home. She described a planet called Arcturus Prime, where the sun was much hotter than Earth's sun. Her people, the thermals, had evolved to absorb and share heat energy with each other. They lived in large communities where everyone helped keep everyone else warm. "We're like a big family," she explained. "When someone gets cold, others gather round to share their warmth. It's how we've survived for thousands of years." David found himself fascinated by her stories. Lyra described cities that looked like giant crystals, food that grew underground near hot springs, and transportation that worked by channeling heat energy. Everything sounded impossible. But the way she told it made it seem real. "Why did you come to Earth?" David asked. Lyra's expression became more serious. "My people are explorers. We study other worlds to learn how different species live. I was part of a small team sent to observe Earth from a distance. But something went wrong with our ships during entry into your atmosphere. During the day, Lyra was full of energy. She helped David with his daily tasks around the cabin, showing surprising strength when moving heavy logs for the fireplace. She was curious about everything: how his coffee maker worked, why he had so many books, what his job as a ranger involved. But as afternoon turned to evening, David noticed changes in her. Lyra began moving more slowly. Her skin gradually became paler, and she started staying closer to the fireplace. By sunset, she was shivering again despite the warm cabin. "It happens every day," she explained, wrapping herself in blankets. "As the temperature drops, my body can't maintain its heat on my world. This would never happen because others would share their warmth. But here, you're the only one who can help me." That second night, David lay beside her again. He was getting used to the routine, but something felt different. As Lyra's skin warmed against his, David felt a strange tingling sensation, like mild electricity running through his body. When he mentioned it, Lyra looked concerned. "That shouldn't happen," she said quietly. "Let me check something." She placed her hand on David's chest, and her skin glowed softly. "Your body temperature is higher than it was yesterday, and your heartbeat is stronger." "Is that bad?" "I'm not sure. This has never happened before." The days fell into a pattern. David would go about his ranger duties during the day, checking trails and monitoring wildlife. Lyra would stay at the cabin, reading his books and learning about Earth culture. She was amazingly quick to understand things, like she was downloading information directly into her brain. But David started noticing strange things happening around town. When he went to Cedar Falls for supplies, the clerk at the general store mentioned that people were having unusually vivid dreams. The local mechanic said several customers had brought in cars with electrical problems. That made no sense. "Weird stuff's been happening since that big storm," the mechanic told David. "GPS systems going crazy, radios picking up strange signals. Must be some kind of atmospheric thing." David didn't mention Lyra, but he wondered if her presence was somehow affecting the area. When he asked her about it, she looked worried. "It's possible," she admitted. "My people naturally generate electromagnetic fields. If I'm not properly contained within a ship's shielding, those fields might spread outward." "Is it dangerous?" "Not directly harmful to humans, but it can interfere with your technology." 2 weeks after the crash, David realized he was changing. In other ways, too. He needed less sleep but felt more alert. His eyesight seemed sharper, and he could work outside in cold weather without getting as chilled as before. Most surprising, he found himself able to sense Lyra's location in the cabin. Even when she was in another room, "There's definitely a connection forming between us," Lyra confirmed when he told her. "On my world, when thermals share heat regularly, they develop what you might call a thermal bond. But this has never happened between a thermal and another species." David wasn't sure how to feel about this. Part of him enjoyed the changes. He felt stronger and more alive than ever before. But another part worried about what was happening to his humanity. "Will it keep getting stronger?" he asked. "I think so. The more we share warmth, the deeper the connection becomes." Despite his concerns, David found himself looking forward to their nights together. Lyra was intelligent and funny, and her stories about other worlds fascinated him. She seemed genuinely interested in learning about his life too, asking detailed questions about his childhood, his work, and his dreams. 3 weeks after the crash, David made a discovery that changed everything. While checking the crash site, he decided to explore the area more thoroughly. Using his metal detector, he found fragments of the same strange metal scattered over a much wider area than he'd originally thought. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Hidden under a fallen log, David found what looked like a piece of electronic equipment. It was small, about the size of a smartphone, but made of the same metallic material as Lyra's ship. Strange symbols covered its surface, and when David picked it up, it felt warm. When he brought it back to the cabin, Lyra's reaction told him everything. Her face went pale, and she grabbed the device with shaking hands. "Where did you find this?" she asked urgently. "Near your crash site. What is it?" Lyra stared at the device for a long moment before answering. "It's a communication unit." "But David, this isn't from my ship." The words hit David like ice water. "What do you mean? My ship only had one communication device, and it was destroyed in the crash. This belongs to another ship." Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. "There are others here." David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Others of your kind." "Yes, but David, you have to understand something. Not all of my people are like me." Lyra sat down heavily. Still holding the device, she looked more frightened than David had ever seen her. "I told you I was part of a research team, and that's true. But I didn't tell you everything about why we came here." She took a deep breath. "My people's planet is dying, David. Our sun is cooling, and we can't generate enough heat to survive much longer. So you're refugees? Some of us are. But others see Earth as a resource to be harvested." David's blood ran cold. "What kind of resource?" "Thermal hosts. Humans who can provide the warmth we need to survive. Most of my people believe humans are just animals, useful only for the heat they provide. They wouldn't form emotional connections. Like," she looked at David meaningfully, "like what's happened between us, the thermal bond." David suddenly understood that what he thought was something special and mutual might actually be something else entirely. "Have you been using me?" he asked quietly. "Not in the way you think." Lyra stood up and faced him. "Yes, I need your warmth to survive. But David, what's grown between us, the connection we have, that's not something I can fake or manufacture. It's real. How can I know that for sure?" Instead of answering with words, Lyra did something she'd never done before. She placed both hands on David's chest, and her skin began to glow brightly. But this time, David felt something different. It wasn't just warmth flowing between them. It was emotion, memory, sensation. For a brief moment, he experienced what Lyra felt. He felt her loneliness on a dying world, her fear during the crash, her amazement at his kindness, her growing affection for him, and underneath it all, a deep sadness about something she hadn't told him. When the connection ended, David staggered backward. What was that? A complete thermal bond. I've never shared that deeply with anyone, not even others of my kind. Tears were running down Lyra's cheeks. "David, I need to tell you something else, something I should have said weeks ago." David braced himself. "The changes in your body, they're not just from sharing warmth with me. I've been slowly altering your biology to make you a more compatible thermal partner." The room seemed to spin around David. "You've been changing me without asking?" "It wasn't intentional at first. It's an automatic response when a thermal bonds with someone." "But David," her voice broke, "I can't reverse it. What's done is done, and there's more. The others of my kind who are here. They're not just looking for random humans to bond with. They're looking for me. I was supposed to make contact weeks ago, and when I don't respond to their signals, they'll come searching." David sank into a chair, trying to process everything. "And when they find you, if they discover that I've bonded with a human, if they see what I've done to you," Lyra's voice was barely audible, "they'll consider both of us contaminated, dangerous." "What does that mean?" Lyra met his eyes, and David saw fear there that chilled him to the bone. "It means they'll try to eliminate us both." David spent the next 2 days in a fog of confusion and anger. He'd wake up each morning feeling the changes in his body more strongly than before. His skin felt warmer, his senses were sharper, and he could actually feel Lyra's presence even when she was outside the cabin. But knowing these changes were happening without his permission made everything different. Lyra tried to give him space, but her nightly need for warmth meant they still had to sleep close together. Those hours were tense and awkward. David would lie stiffly beside her, trying not to think about how her presence was literally changing his DNA. On Thursday morning, everything got worse. David was chopping firewood when he noticed vehicles coming up the mountain road toward his cabin. 3 black SUVs with government license plates. His heart started racing as he realized this was exactly what Lyra had warned him about. He ran inside to find Lyra already packing her few belongings into a small bag. Her face was pale with fear. "They're here," she said without looking up. "I can sense them." "These aren't my people, David. These are your government agents. How did they find us?" "The electromagnetic disturbances I've been causing. They must have tracking equipment." Lyra grabbed David's hand. "David, if they take me, you need to know something important. The changes in your body won't stop just because I'm gone. In fact, without me here to help regulate them, they might get much worse." Before David could ask what she meant, loud knocking echoed through the cabin. "David Rodriguez. This is Agent Kim Chen from the Department of Unusual Phenomena. We need to speak with you immediately." David looked at Lyra. "Is there somewhere you can hide?" "They have thermal sensors. They'll find me no matter where I go." The knocking became more insistent. "Mr. Rodriguez, we know you're in there. We're not here to hurt you or your guest. We just want to talk." David made a quick decision. "Wait here," he told Lyra, then opened the door. Agent Chen was a middle-aged woman in a dark suit, flanked by 2 men who looked like they could lift cars. Behind them, David could see more agents setting up equipment around his cabin. "Mr. Rodriguez, thank you for cooperating. We're investigating unusual energy readings in this area, and we believe you may have encountered something that requires our attention." "I don't know what you're talking about," David said, trying to sound calm. Agent Chen smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Sir, we've been tracking electromagnetic anomalies for the past month. The epicenter is your cabin. We also have reports from town about electronic malfunctions, unusual dreams, and other phenomena that match patterns we've seen before." "Patterns?" "Similar incidents have occurred in 17 other locations worldwide over the past 6 months. In each case, we found evidence of crashed extraterrestrial vehicles and missing persons who had encountered their occupants." David's blood ran cold. "Missing persons?" "The beings we're tracking form parasitic relationships with humans. They bond with their hosts to survive in our atmosphere, but the process is ultimately fatal to the human. We're here to help you, Mr. Rodriguez." Before David could respond, one of the agents spoke into his radio. "Thermal signature confirmed. To beings inside. One definitely not human." Agent Chen's expression became more serious. "Mr. Rodriguez, we need you to step aside so we can help your friend. The longer you're exposed to her influence, the more damage she'll do to your system." "She's not hurting me," David said, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it anymore. "Sir, we've seen this before. The beings make their hosts feel better temporarily, but it's part of the bonding process. Eventually, your body will become completely dependent on the alien's presence. When that happens, you'll die within days if separated from her." David felt the world spinning around him. Was this true? Had Lyra been slowly killing him this whole time? From inside the cabin, he heard Lyra's voice. "David, don't listen to them. They don't understand what's really happening." Agent Chen signaled to her team, and they began moving toward the door. "Mr. Rodriguez, please step aside. We have medical teams standing by to help you through the withdrawal process." That's when David felt something he'd never experienced before. A surge of heat rushed through his body, and suddenly he could sense everything around him with crystal clarity. He could feel the electromagnetic fields from the agent's equipment, the heat signatures of every person nearby, even the electrical activity in their brains. "David," Lyra appeared in the doorway behind him. "It's time." "Time for what?" "To choose. Stay here and let them take me away, knowing that the changes in your body will continue without guidance, or come with me and discover what we can become together." Agent Chen raised her hand, and her team aimed strange-looking weapons at Lyra. "The being is attempting to complete the bonding process. We need to act now." David looked back at Lyra. Her skin was glowing brightly, and he could feel waves of heat radiating from her. But instead of feeling threatened, he felt powerful. "What happens if I go with you?" he asked. "We run, we hide, and we figure out how to control these changes." Together, Lyra held out her hand. "David, I know I should have told you everything from the beginning, but what's happening to you? It's not death, it's evolution." The agents were closing in. David had seconds to decide. He thought about his quiet life alone in the mountains. Then he thought about the past month with Lyra, the conversations, the connection, the feeling that he was becoming something more than he'd ever been. David took Lyra's hand. The moment their skin touched, heat exploded through the clearing. Every piece of electronic equipment the agents carried sparked and died. Car engines stopped running. Even their weapons powered down. "Run," Lyra whispered, and they sprinted toward the forest. David had never run so fast in his life, with Lyra beside him. He felt like he could leap over trees and run forever without getting tired. Behind them, he could hear the agents shouting and trying to get their equipment working again. They ran deep into the forest, to places David knew the vehicles couldn't follow. After an hour of running, they stopped beside a small stream to catch their breath. "How do we do that?" David panted. "That thing with their electronics? The thermal bond is complete now," Lyra explained. "When we touched while both of us were generating high heat, it created an electromagnetic pulse. You can do things now that normal humans can't." David looked at his hands. They looked the same, but he could feel energy flowing through them. "What am I becoming? Something new. Something that's never existed before. A human thermal hybrid." Lyra sat down on a fallen log. "David, I need to tell you about the others of my kind who are here." As if summoned by her words, 3 figures emerged from the trees around them. They looked like Lyra, pale skin, silver hair, and that same otherworldly beauty. But their expressions were cold and hostile. Lyra, the tallest one, spoke. "You were supposed to report for collection 3 weeks ago." "Hello, Zane." Lyra stood up slowly. "I had complications. We can see that." Zane's eyes fixed on David with disgust. "You've contaminated yourself with this primitive species." "He's not primitive," Lyra said firmly, "and I haven't contaminated myself. I've evolved." The other thermals moved to flank David and Lyra. David realized they were surrounded. "The Council will not accept this deviation from the mission." Zane said, "You were sent to study humans, not bond with them." "The mission was wrong," Lyra replied. "These beings aren't just heat sources. They're intelligent, emotional, creative. They deserve partnership, not exploitation. Irrelevant. You and your pet will return with us for correction." That's when David felt anger surge through him like never before. The stream beside them began to steam, and the air around him shimmered with heat. "I'm not anyone's pet," he said, his voice sounding strange even to himself. Zane laughed. "The hybrid thinks it is power. How amusing." He raised his hand toward David, and David felt a sudden, terrible cold trying to freeze his blood. But instead of weakening him, it seemed to awaken something inside him. David raised his own hand, and a wave of heat pushed back against Zane's attack. The 3 aliens looked genuinely surprised. "Impossible," one of them whispered. "Humans can't generate thermal energy." "I'm not just human anymore," David said. He looked at Lyra. "What do we do?" Lyra smiled, and for the first time since the agents had arrived, she looked confident. "We show them what real evolution looks like." She took David's hand again, and immediately he felt their connection deepen. But this time, instead of just sharing warmth, they were sharing power. David could sense Lyra's knowledge, her abilities, her strength, and he could feel her accessing his human creativity, his emotional depth, his determination. Together, they created something neither species had ever achieved alone. Heat erupted from their joined hands, but it wasn't destructive. Instead, it formed complex patterns in the air, beautiful, swirling designs of light and energy that spoke directly to the mind rather than the eyes. The 3 alien attackers stopped their advance, staring in amazement at the display. This is what happens when species work together instead of trying to dominate each other. Lyra said, "This is what you could learn if you open your minds." For a moment, David thought they might actually convince the others. But then Zane's expression hardened. Abomination, he hissed. The council will hear of this, and they will send others to correct it. The three thermals backed away, then seemed to simply dissolve into the air like heat mirages. David and Lyra stood alone by the stream, still holding hands, still connected by the bond that had changed them both. Are they gone? David asked. For now, but they'll be back, probably with more of their kind. And the government agents won't give up either. Lyra looked at him seriously. David, we can't go back to your old life. Are you ready for that? David thought about everything he was leaving behind. His job, his cabin, his simple existence. Then he thought about what he was gaining. Abilities he'd never dreamed of. A connection deeper than anything he'd ever experienced, and the chance to help bridge the species that desperately needed each other. Yeah, he said, I'm ready. 6 months later, David and Lyra were living in a hidden community in the mountains of Colorado. They weren't alone. 12 other human thermal pairs had found them, refugees from both the alien collection teams and government agents. David had learned to control his new abilities. He could generate heat, sense electromagnetic fields, and even communicate telepathically with Lyra over short distances. But more importantly, he discovered that the bond hadn't taken away his humanity, it had enhanced it. The community they built was everything Lyra had described from her home world, but better. Humans and thermals worked together, shared knowledge, and created something neither species could have achieved alone. On a cold winter evening, David and Lyra sat on a mountaintop overlooking their hidden valley. Other couples were scattered across the peaks, all of them sharing warmth under the stars. Do you ever regret it? Lyra asked. Giving up your old life? David pulled her closer, feeling their thermal connection pulse with contentment. Never. That wasn't living. It was just existing. The others will keep coming, you know, both my people and yours. Let them come, David said. We'll be ready. He looked up at the stars, knowing that somewhere out there, two species were afraid of what David and Lyra represented. But here, in this moment, sharing warmth with the woman who had fallen from the sky and changed his world forever. David felt nothing but hope for the future they were building together.